The morning fog rolled across the tarmac at Bradley International Airport in Connecticut, where the distant hum of commercial jets created a constant symphony of modern aviation. But 15 miles away, in the small industrial town of Millbrook, a different kind of aviation story was unfolding in a converted barn that had seen better days. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Shun wiped her grease-stained hands on her coveralls as she emerged from beneath the belly of a vintage Cessna 172. The aircraft had been grounded for 3 weeks with what its owner called mysterious engine trouble, but Maya had diagnosed the problem within minutes of her first inspection. A faulty fuel pump, corroded connections, and a carburetor that hadn't been properly maintained in years. Nothing that couldn't be fixed with the right parts, patience, and the kind of intuitive understanding that came from growing up surrounded by engines. At 28, Maya had already earned her reputation throughout the Connecticut River Valley as someone who could fix anything that flew. Her small operation, Chun Aviation Services, occupied a corner of what used to be the Thompson family dairy farm. The red barn still bore faded advertisements for milk and feed, but inside it housed a collection of aircraft in various stages of repair. Crop dusters, private planes, experimental aircraft built by weekend hobbyists. Maya worked on them all with the same meticulous attention to detail. The morning sun filtered through the barn's high windows, casting long shadows across her workspace. Maya had been up since 5, as was her habit, starting each day with a cup of coffee and a mental inventory of the projects ahead. Today's schedule included finishing the Cessna, troubleshooting an electrical issue in a Piper Cherokee, and beginning a complete engine rebuild on a 1950s Beechcraft Bonanza whose owner had given up on finding anyone else willing to take on the challenge. Maya's father, David Chun, had immigrated to the United States from Taiwan in the 1970s with a mechanical engineering degree and dreams of working in the aerospace industry. Instead, he'd found himself repairing farm equipment and small aircraft for local farmers and pilots who couldn't afford the high prices at certified repair stations. He'd built this business from nothing, earning trust through honest work and fair prices. When Maya was 8 years old, she'd started spending afternoons in the barn, handing him tools and absorbing lessons about engines, hydraulics, and the intricate systems that kept aircraft aloft. By the time she was 12, Maya was rebuilding carburetors on her own. At 16, she was diagnosing problems that stumped mechanics with decades of experience. Her father had taught her that every engine had its own personality, its own way of communicating when something wasn't right. You had to listen, he'd say, not just with your ears but with your hands, your instincts, your understanding of how things should work versus how they actually did. The academic world had never held much appeal for Maya. She'd graduated high school with decent grades, but while her classmates headed off to college, she'd chosen to stay in Millbrook and learn the family business. Her parents had supported her decision, though her mother, Susan, occasionally wondered aloud what might have happened if Maya had pursued aerospace engineering or joined the Air Force like her cousin Robert had done. Maya had actually considered military service briefly after high school. She'd visited the recruiter's office twice, drawn by the possibility of working on more sophisticated aircraft than the aging crop dusters and weekend warriors that made up most of her clientele. But something about the rigid structure, the emphasis on following procedures rather than thinking creatively, had felt wrong. She'd grown up solving problems through innovation and adaptation, not by adhering to manuals and regulations. The sound of gravel crunching under tires interrupted her thoughts. Maya looked up to see a battered pickup truck pulling into the barn's parking area. Tom Bradley, a local farmer who owned a 20-year-old Cessna 182, climbed out of the driver's seat with the careful movements of someone whose joints had been protesting the morning cold. "Morning, Maya." Tom called out, his breath visible in the cool air. "How's she looking?" Maya gestured toward the Cessna 172. "Should have her ready by noon." The fuel pump was shot, just like I thought, but I had a compatible replacement in stock. Also found some corrosion in the electrical system that would have caused problems. Down the line, Tom nodded approvingly. Maya's thoroughness was one of the reasons pilots throughout the region sought her out. She didn't just fix the immediate problem. She identified potential issues before they became dangerous. It was a philosophy her father had instilled in her, an aircraft mechanic's responsibility, extended beyond the current repair to the safety of everyone who would fly that plane in the future. "You know," Tom said, leaning against his truck, "I was talking to Bill Morrison over at the airport yesterday. He mentioned that Northwest Charter is having trouble finding qualified mechanics. They're expanding their operation, looking for someone who can handle complex repairs on their turboprop fleet." Maya had heard of Northwest Charter. They operated out of Bradley International, providing transportation services for corporate clients and specialized cargo runs. Their fleet included several King Air 350s and a couple of Pilatus PC-12s, sophisticated aircraft that required certification and training far beyond what Maya's current license covered. "I appreciate the thought," Maya replied, "but I'm not sure that's for me. I like what I do here." The truth was more complicated. Maya had looked into the requirements for working on turbine aircraft, and the path seemed designed to exclude people like her. It would mean months of formal training, expensive certifications, and ultimately working within a corporate structure that valued credentials over capability. She'd built her reputation on results, not paperwork. Tom seemed to understand. "Well, if you ever change your mind, the offer's there. Bill says good mechanics are getting harder to find, especially ones who really understand aircraft systems." After Tom left, Maya returned to her work on the Cessna. She removed the old fuel pump, cleaned the mounting surfaces, and began installing the replacement. The work required precision. Too much torque on the bolts and you'd strip the threads. Too little and the pump might fail in flight. It was the kind of detail that separated competent mechanics from truly skilled ones. As she worked, Maya's mind wandered to the conversation with Tom. She'd driven past Bradley International Airport countless times, watching the sleek corporate jets and commercial airliners taxi to and from the terminals. There was something appealing about the idea of working on more advanced aircraft, pushing herself to master new systems and technologies. But she also knew the aviation industry had its own rigid hierarchies, its own ways of determining who belonged and who didn't. Maya had encountered this attitude before. A few years earlier, she'd attended a trade show in Hartford where aircraft manufacturers and suppliers displayed their latest products. She'd been interested in some new diagnostic equipment, but the sales representatives had consistently addressed their pitches to the male mechanic standing nearby, assuming Maya was someone's assistant rather than a business owner. When she'd corrected them, their demeanor had shifted from dismissive to patronizing. Suddenly she was being talked to like a child who needed complex concepts explained in simple terms. The experience had reinforced Maya's preference for working independently. In her barn, surrounded by aircraft she understood intimately, she didn't have to prove herself to anyone except the pilots who trusted her with their lives. Results spoke louder than credentials, and she'd never had a customer question her work after seeing what she could accomplish. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors. Jerry Walsh stopped by to pick up his restored Piper Cub, which Maya had spent 6 weeks returning to airworthy condition after a hard landing had damaged the landing gear. The sight of the restored aircraft, its yellow fabric gleaming in the Mayo afternoon sun, filled Maya with the same satisfaction she'd felt as a child when she'd successfully repaired a broken toy. Later, Sandra Phillips arrived with her Mooney M20, reporting a strange vibration that had started during her last flight. Maya spent an hour troubleshooting the issue, eventually discovering that one of the propeller bolts had worked loose. It was the kind of problem that could have been catastrophic if left unaddressed, but Sandra trusted Maya's expertise completely. "I don't know what we'd do without you," Sandra said as Maya torqued the bolt to specification. "The guys at the airport quoted me 3 times what you charge, and I'm not sure they would have found the real problem." Comments like that made Maya's day. She'd built her business on the foundation her father had established: honest work, fair prices, and a genuine commitment to keeping aircraft safe. But she'd also expanded beyond what he'd imagined, developing expertise in systems he'd never worked on and building relationships with pilots throughout New England. As evening approached, Maya cleaned her tools and organized her workspace for the next day. The barn fell quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on Route 9 and the occasional aircraft passing overhead. She stood in the doorway, looking out at the Connecticut River Valley stretching toward the horizon, and felt a familiar sense of contentment. This was her world, practical, grounded, focused on solving real problems for real people. But lately, she'd been experiencing moments of restlessness. The work that had once challenged her now felt routine. She could diagnose most problems by sound, fix them efficiently, and move on to the next project. Part of her wondered what it would be like to work on aircraft that pushed the boundaries of her knowledge, to face problems that required her to grow and adapt. Maya locked the barn and walked to her house, a modest Cape Cod that sat on the edge of the property. Her parents had built it in the 1980s, and Maya had inherited it when they'd retired to Florida 5 years earlier. The house felt too big for one person, but it was home, filled with memories of family dinners and conversations about aircraft and engineering that had shaped her understanding of the world. She made dinner and settled into her father's old chair, with a technical manual about turbine engines. Even though she didn't work on such aircraft professionally, Maya maintained subscriptions to several aviation magazines and regularly studied systems she might never encounter. Knowledge was like insurance. You hoped you'd never need it, but when you did, you were grateful to have it. The manual described the complex systems that governed modern turboprop aircraft, fuel controls, environmental systems, sophisticated avionics that made her familiar aircraft seem primitive by comparison. Maya found herself absorbed in the technical details, imagining how these systems might fail and how they could be repaired. It was a mental exercise she'd been doing since childhood, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like preparation for something she couldn't yet name. Outside, the lights of aircraft passed overhead, following the established airways that connected major airports throughout the Northeast. Maya watched them through her window, wondering about the pilots and passengers aboard those flights, about the mechanics who maintained those aircraft, about the entire infrastructure that made modern aviation possible. She belonged to that world, even if she occupied a small corner of it. Every aircraft she repaired, every problem she solved, every flight she made possible contributed to the larger miracle of flight. It was honest work, necessary work, work that mattered. But as she prepared for bed, Maya found herself wondering if there might be more, if somewhere beyond the familiar boundaries of her world, there was a challenge that would test everything she'd learned and push her to become something greater than she'd imagined possible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning would bring new aircraft, new problems, new opportunities to prove her skills. But tonight, as she drifted off to sleep, Maya dreamed of aircraft she'd never seen, problems she'd never solved, and skies she'd never flown through. In her dreams, she was not just a mechanic in a converted barn. She was someone whose skills and knowledge could make the difference between disaster and safety, between failure and success, between tragedy and triumph. She had no way of knowing that in just a few weeks, Those dreams would become reality in ways she could never have imagined. 3 weeks after her conversation with Tom Bradley, Maya found herself standing in the pristine lobby of Northwest Charter Services at Bradley International Airport. The contrast between this sterile corporate environment and her cluttered barn couldn't have been starker. Polished marble floors reflected the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, while framed photographs of sleek aircraft adorned the walls. Everything here spoke of precision, professionalism, and substantial financial resources. Maya had called ahead to schedule an appointment, explaining her background and interest in expanding her skills to turbine aircraft. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer who spoke in the practiced tones of corporate customer service, had seemed skeptical but agreed to arrange a meeting with the maintenance supervisor. "Mr. Harrison will see you now," Jennifer announced, her smile polite but distant. Maya followed her down a hallway lined with aviation safety posters and company awards. Past offices where men in crisp white shirts conducted phone conferences about flight schedules and maintenance intervals. Robert Harrison's office occupied a corner of the building, with windows overlooking the main hangar where several King Air turboprops sat in various stages of maintenance. Harrison himself was a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His desk was organized with military precision, adorned with plaques recognizing his 25 years of service in the Air Force before transitioning to civilian aviation. "Miss Chun," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "I understand you're interested in working on our aircraft." His tone suggested he was already skeptical about the prospect. Maya took the offered seat, acutely aware of how her practical clothes and work boots contrasted with the corporate atmosphere. "I've been maintaining aircraft for over 15 years, and I'm looking to expand my certification to include turbine engines." Harrison picked up a folder from his desk. Apparently he'd done some research on her background. "I see you operate out of a barn in Millbrook, working on small aircraft mostly." He made no effort to hide his dismissive tone. "Miss Chun, what we do here is quite different from changing oil and spark plugs on weekend warriors." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, but Maya maintained her composure. "I understand that turbine aircraft are more complex. That's why I'm here, to learn and grow my skills. Our aircraft carry corporate executives and time-sensitive cargo," Harrison continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "A King Air 350 costs over $7 million new. The liability exposure alone requires technicians with extensive formal training and certifications. We can't afford to take chances with enthusiasts." Maya felt her cheeks flush at the word enthusiasts, but she pressed on. "I have excellent references from pilots throughout the region. I've never had a mechanical failure on any aircraft I've worked on." Harrison glanced at his watch, clearly eager to end the meeting. "I'm sure you're competent within your niche, but what you're asking for isn't realistic. Our insurance requires all technicians to have formal training from approved schools, plus years of experience on turbine aircraft. We can't make exceptions, regardless of how well-intentioned." The meeting ended with Harrison's secretary providing Maya with a brochure for a technical school in Oklahoma that offered turbine engine training. The program required 18 months of full-time study, cost $40,000, and had a waiting list of over a year. As Maya drove back to Millbrook, she couldn't shake the feeling that these barriers were designed to keep people like her out of the industry's upper echelons. The rejection stung, but it also fueled Maya's determination. Over the following weeks, she began reaching out to other aviation businesses in the region. The responses followed a depressingly familiar pattern. Transair Express, a cargo company operating out of Hartford, needed mechanics but required 5 years of turbine experience. Atlantic Aviation Services would consider her application after she completed their preferred training program and passed their internal examinations. Executive Flight Solutions didn't even return her calls. The most frustrating encounter came at Precision Aviation, a maintenance facility that specialized in corporate jets. Maya had driven to their facility in Westfield, Massachusetts, hoping to speak with someone in person rather than being dismissed over the phone. The facility manager, a heavy-set man named Greg Winters, had at least agreed to meet with her. "Look, I'll be straight with you," Winters said, leading her through a hangar filled with gleaming Gulfstreams and citations. "This isn't about your skills. I'm sure you're good at what you do. But my clients expect to see certain credentials when they drop off a $20 million aircraft. They want to know their mechanic graduated from Embry-Riddle or served in the military. They don't want to hear about someone who learned in a barn." Maya watched technicians working on a Cessna Cessation, noting their methodical approach to removing an engine panel. The work looked challenging, but not insurmountable. What if I could demonstrate my abilities, show that I can handle the complexity? Winters shook his head. "It's not that simple. The FAA requires specific training for different aircraft types. Our insurance won't cover work performed by uncertified technicians. And honestly, our clients pay premium prices partly for the assurance. That comes with working with established professionals." The drive home from Westfield gave Maya time to process what she'd learned. The aviation industry operated on a rigid hierarchy of credentials and certifications, designed to maintain safety standards, but also serving to exclude those who'd learned their skills through unconventional paths. Her 15 years of experience and flawless safety record meant nothing without the right paperwork. Back in Millbrook, Maya threw herself into her work with renewed intensity. If the corporate aviation world wouldn't accept her, she'd continue building her reputation in this segment of the industry that valued results over credentials. But the rejections had planted a seed of resentment that grew with each passing day. The breaking point came during a visit to the annual New England Aviation Expo in Worcester. Maya had attended the event for years, usually finding it valuable for networking and learning about new products. This year felt different. As she walked through the exhibitor booths, she noticed how sales representatives consistently addressed their pitches to the male attendees, even when she was clearly interested in their products. At one booth, displaying advanced diagnostic equipment, Maya spent 20 minutes examining a digital engine analyzer that could have revolutionized her troubleshooting capabilities. When she finally approached the salesman, he immediately assumed she was shopping for her husband or father. "This is pretty technical stuff," he said with a patronizing smile. "Maybe you'd be more interested in our pilot supplies over there." Maya's patience finally snapped. "I'm a certificated aircraft mechanic with 15 years of experience. I was interested in your product until you assumed I was too stupid to understand it." The salesman's face reddened as nearby attendees turned to watch the confrontation. "I didn't mean to imply. I just thought ... You thought what exactly?" Maya's voice carried clearly through the booth area. "That women can't understand engines? That someone without the right uniform doesn't belong here?" The incident created a buzz throughout the expo, but not the kind Maya had hoped for. Within an hour, she overheard whispered conversations about the angry woman who'd caused a scene. Several exhibitors who'd been friendly in previous years now avoided eye contact when she approached their booths. The drive home from Worcester marked a turning point in Maya's perspective. She'd spent years believing that competence and dedication would eventually overcome prejudice and institutional barriers. The aviation industry's response had taught her otherwise. Success in this field required more than skill. It demanded conformity to established norms and acceptance of hierarchies that favored credentials over capability. That evening, Maya sat in her father's chair, staring at the collection of technical manuals that lined her bookshelf. She'd accumulated knowledge that rivaled many formally trained technicians, but in the eyes of the industry, she remained an outsider. The frustration was compounded by her growing awareness that her skills were stagnating. The aircraft she worked on presented familiar challenges, and she developed efficient solutions for most common problems. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Tom Bradley stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Maya, I heard about what happened at the expo," he said. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble by suggesting you look into Northwest Charter." Maya invited him in, grateful for the company. "It's not your fault, Tom. I needed to learn these lessons eventually. The thing is," Tom continued, settling into her kitchen chair, "I've been flying for 30 years, and I can spot a good mechanic from a mile away. You've got instincts that can't be taught in any school. The industry's loss is our gain, but it still isn't right." After Tom left, Maya found herself thinking about her father's experiences as an immigrant trying to establish himself in American aviation. He'd faced similar barriers, though probably compounded by language and cultural differences. Yet he'd persevered, building a business through sheer determination and gradually earning respect through consistent, quality work. The difference was that her father had been content to remain in a small niche, serving local pilots and farmers. Maya had harbored larger ambitions, imagining herself working on cutting-edge aircraft, solving complex problems, maybe even contributing to advances in aviation technology. The industry's rejection had forced her to confront the gap between her dreams and reality. Over the following weeks, Maya noticed subtle changes in how she was perceived within her own community. Word of her confrontation at the expo had spread, and while some local pilots remained supportive, others seemed to view her differently. During a conversation at the airport coffee shop, she overheard two pilots discussing her attitude problem and questioning whether she'd become too aggressive for her own good. The whispers hurt more than the outright rejections. Maya had always prided herself on professionalism and courtesy, but her frustration with industry bias had apparently been interpreted as arrogance. She began to question whether her pursuit of recognition in corporate aviation was worth the damage to her reputation in the community where she'd built her career. One particularly difficult day came when Sandra Phillips, one of Maya's most loyal customers, arrived with Mooney but seemed hesitant to discuss the problem she'd encountered during her last flight. "I heard you've been having some difficulties with other shops," Sandra said carefully. "I hope that won't affect your work here." Maya felt a chill of realization. The aviation community was small and interconnected, and her reputation was being shaped by gossip and speculation rather than her actual performance. "Sandra, my work speaks for itself. It always has." "I know, and I trust you completely," Sandra replied quickly. "But some of the other owners are wondering if you're becoming dissatisfied with the kind of work you do here." The conversation revealed an uncomfortable truth. Maya's attempts to break into corporate aviation had been interpreted as rejection of her current clients. The pilots who'd supported her for years now wondered if she considered their aircraft beneath her notice. The irony was bitter. She'd been rejected by the elite sector of the industry, while simultaneously alienating the community that had always accepted her. That night, Maya walked through her barn, past the aircraft that represented her life's work. Each one told a story of problems solved, challenges overcome, and lives potentially saved through her dedication to safety and quality. She'd built something valuable here, something that mattered to real people. But the taste of rejection lingered, along with the growing realization that her ambitions might be fundamentally incompatible with the industry's entrenched attitudes. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jerry Walsh's voice came through the speaker, tight with concern. "Maya, I'm having trouble with the Cub. Engine running rough, and I've got a passenger flight scheduled for tomorrow morning. Can you take a look?" Maya glanced at her watch. It was nearly 9 o'clock, well past normal business hours. But Jerry had been one of her first customers, and his restored Piper Cub was a source of pride for both of them. Bring her over. I'll take a look tonight." As she waited for Jerry to arrive, Maya reflected on the choice before her. She could continue pursuing acceptance in corporate aviation, fighting against bias and institutional barriers that might never fully yield. Or she could embrace her role as an outsider, serving clients who valued her skills regardless of her credentials. The sound of Jerry's aircraft approaching the barn made the decision for her, at least temporarily. Whatever her ultimate path, tonight there was an aircraft that needed her attention and a pilot who trusted her to keep him safe. In that moment, credentials and corporate politics seemed less important than the immediate, practical work of solving problems and maintaining the machines that carried people safely through the sky. But as she prepared to diagnose Jerry's engine trouble, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that her story with the aviation establishment was far from over. The rejections had stung, but they'd also revealed something important about the industry's limitations and blind spots. Somewhere in the future, there would be a situation where conventional credentials wouldn't matter, where only skill and knowledge would determine the outcome. When that moment came, Maya intended to be ready. The opportunity came through an unexpected source. Dr. Amanda Foster, a surgeon who operated a Cessna TTX out of Bradley International, had been one of Maya's customers for 3 years. Unlike many of the recreational pilots Maya served, Dr. Foster used her aircraft for medical missions, transporting organs and medical personnel to rural hospitals throughout New England. Their relationship had always been strictly professional, until the day Dr. Foster mentioned her brother. "Michael runs the maintenance night shift at Skyward Express," she said while Maya performed the annual inspection on her aircraft. "They're desperate for qualified people, and he's mentioned they might be willing to train the right candidate." Skyward Express operated a fleet of cargo aircraft from a dedicated facility at Bradley International, specializing in time-sensitive shipments for pharmaceutical companies and medical suppliers. Their operation included several turboprop aircraft and a pair of converted Boeing 737s that had been modified for freight service. More importantly, they operated under different regulations than passenger carriers, with slightly more flexibility. In their hiring practices, Maya had researched the company thoroughly before Dr. Foster arranged an introduction. Skyward Express had been founded 15 years earlier by former military pilots who understood the critical nature of medical cargo. Their safety record was exemplary, but their rapid growth had outpaced their ability to recruit certified technicians. The company offered good benefits and tuition assistance for employees seeking additional certifications. The interview with Michael Foster took place on a Tuesday evening in the company's break room, surrounded by shift schedules and maintenance bulletins. Michael was younger than his sister, probably in his early 30s, with the practical demeanor of someone who'd worked his way up through the ranks rather than starting in management. "Amanda says you're good with engines," he began, studying Maya's resume. "But I'll be honest, we need someone who can handle turbine aircraft, and most of our work happens at night when the cargo flights operate." Maya had anticipated this. Objection. "I'm willing to work any shift, and I learn quickly. I've been studying turbine engine manuals on my own time." "Studying manuals is different from hands-on experience," Michael replied, but his tone wasn't dismissive. "Tell me about the most complex problem you've ever solved." Maya described a recent case involving an experimental aircraft whose builder had installed an incompatible avionics system. The installation had created electromagnetic interference that affected multiple systems, requiring her to trace circuits, analyze signal patterns, and ultimately redesign part of the electrical architecture. It had taken her 2 weeks of methodical troubleshooting to identify and correct the problem. Michael listened carefully, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated his own expertise. Unlike the corporate managers she'd encountered at other companies, he seemed genuinely interested in her problem-solving approach rather than her credentials. "Here's what I can offer," he said finally. "We need someone for general maintenance and support work, cleaning, organizing, basic inspections. It's not glamorous, but it would get you inside our operation where you could observe and learn. If you prove yourself reliable, we might be able to arrange for you to work toward turbine certification. The position paid less than Maya earned from her independent operation, but it represented access to the world she'd been trying to enter. After 2 days of consideration, she accepted the offer, arranging to maintain her barn operation on weekends. While working nights at Skyward Express, Maya's first shift began at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. The Skyward Express facility occupied a corner of Bradley International that stayed busy long after the passenger terminals had quieted. Freight aircraft arrived throughout the night, unloading time-sensitive cargo that would be distributed throughout New England by morning. The operation had an urgency that differed from the leisurely pace of recreational aviation. Michael introduced her to the night crew, 4 technicians responsible for maintaining the company's fleet of 12 aircraft. There was Carlos Rodriguez, a veteran mechanic who'd worked on everything from helicopters to heavy jets during his 20-year career. Janet Williams specialized in avionics and electrical systems, having transitioned to aviation after years as an electronics technician. David Park had recently completed his turbine certification and was still learning the nuances of commercial aircraft maintenance. Maya's going to be helping with general support, Michael announced. She's got extensive experience with piston aircraft and she's looking to move into turbines. The crew's reaction was politely neutral. Maya sensed they'd seen other newcomers come and go, and she'd need to prove her value before earning their respect. Her initial assignments were indeed unglamorous, organizing tool cribs, cleaning aircraft interiors, and performing basic visual inspections. But the work gave her access to observe how turbine aircraft maintenance operated. The first thing Maya noticed was the level of documentation required. Every action, no matter how minor, had to be recorded in maintenance logs that would be reviewed by FAA inspectors. The attention to detail exceeded anything she'd encountered in general aviation, but she also recognized that the complexity of the aircraft and the commercial nature of the operation demanded such precision. She watched Carlos perform a routine inspection on a King Air 200, noting how he methodically checked each system according to a detailed checklist. His movements were efficient and practiced, but he also paused occasionally to examine things more closely, trusting his instincts to guide him beyond the written procedures. "The book tells you what to look for," Carlos explained when Maya asked about his process. "But experience teaches you what to listen for, what feels wrong even when it looks right." During her second week, Maya observed Janet troubleshooting an intermittent electrical problem in one of the Boeing 737s. The issue manifested as occasional fluctuations in the navigation display, but only during certain phases of flight. Janet spent hours with diagnostic equipment, testing circuits and analyzing data patterns. "This is what separates turbine work from piston work," Janet said during a break. "These systems are so integrated that a problem in one area can affect something completely different. You have to think systematically, understand how everything connects." Maya found herself fascinated by the complexity. The Boeing's electrical system included backup systems for the backup systems, redundancy built upon redundancy to ensure safety in any conceivable scenario. Yet all this complexity created new possibilities for subtle failures that required sophisticated diagnostic approaches. The breakthrough in Maya's acceptance came during her third week, when she noticed something the regular crew had missed. One of the King Air aircraft had been experiencing unexplained fuel consumption increases, not enough to ground the aircraft, but sufficient to concern the pilots. The crew had checked the obvious causes without finding anything definitive. Maya had been assigned to clean the aircraft's interior when she noticed a slight vibration in the floor panels that seemed inconsistent with normal engine operation. Rather than mentioning it immediately, she spent time during her breaks observing the aircraft during engine runs, Noting when the vibration occurred and correlating it with engine power settings. After several days of observation, Maya approached Carlos with her findings. "I think there might be an issue with the left engine mount. The vibration pattern suggests the engine isn't sitting quite right." Carlos was skeptical but agreed to investigate. A detailed inspection revealed that one of the engine mount bolts had loosened slightly, not enough to show up in routine checks, but sufficient to allow micro-movements that increased drag and fuel consumption. The repair took less than an hour, but the fuel efficiency improvement was immediately noticeable. "How did you catch that?" Carlos asked afterward. "We've been chasing this problem for 2 weeks." Maya explained her observation process, how she'd correlated the vibration patterns with different flight phases. Carlos nodded approvingly. "That's good thinking. You've got instincts for this work." The incident marked a turning point in Maya's relationship with the crew. They began including her in technical discussions, explaining the reasoning behind different procedures, and gradually giving her more complex assignments. She started assisting with actual maintenance tasks under supervision, learning the specific requirements for turbine aircraft work. Maya's learning accelerated rapidly once she gained access to the sophisticated diagnostic equipment used in commercial aviation. The computerized engine analyzers could detect problems that would be impossible to identify with traditional methods. She spent her meal breaks studying the equipment manuals, learning to interpret the data patterns that revealed engine health. One evening, Janet invited Maya to observe while she performed a detailed avionics inspection on the Boeing 737. The aircraft's electronic systems filled several equipment bays, with computer modules controlling everything from flight management to environmental systems. "People think avionics are complicated, but they're actually logical," Janet explained. "Each system has inputs, processing, and outputs. When something goes wrong, you trace the signal path until you find where it breaks down." Maya watched Janet use specialized test equipment to verify signal integrity throughout the navigation system. The methodical approach reminded her of troubleshooting electrical problems in smaller aircraft, but scaled up to accommodate the Boeing's vastly more complex architecture. "The key is understanding the relationships," Janet continued. "These systems talk to each other constantly. A failure in one box can cascade through the entire network." During her 6th week at Skyward Express, Maya witnessed her first major aircraft emergency. A King Air 350 experienced an engine failure during departure, forcing the crew to return for an emergency landing. The aircraft touched down safely, but the failed engine had sustained significant internal damage that would require extensive repairs. Maya watched the crew's response with professional interest. Within minutes of the aircraft's arrival, Carlos had begun a detailed inspection to assess the extent of the damage. Janet checked electronic systems to ensure the failure hadn't affected other aircraft components. David documented everything meticulously, knowing that engine failures triggered intensive FAA investigations. "This is why we do what we do," Michael explained to Maya as they observed the inspection process. "When things go wrong up there, lives depend on how well we've maintained these machines down here." The engine failure investigation provided Maya with insights into failure analysis that she'd never encountered in general aviation. Investigators from the engine manufacturer arrived within hours, bringing specialized equipment to analyze the failed components. Every piece of the engine would be examined, every maintenance action reviewed, every possible contributing factor investigated. Maya's role in the investigation was limited to providing basic support, but she absorbed every detail of the process. She learned how metallurgical analysis could reveal the sequence of events leading to component failure, how maintenance records were scrutinized for any deviation from approved procedures, how the entire aviation system responded to ensure such failures didn't recur. The investigation concluded that the engine failure resulted from a manufacturing defect rather than maintenance error. But the experience reinforced Maya's understanding of the responsibility that came with working on commercial aircraft. The margin for error was essentially zero, and every decision had potential consequences for crew and cargo safety. As autumn progressed, Maya's competence became increasingly evident to the crew. She'd mastered the documentation requirements, developed proficiency with diagnostic equipment, and demonstrated the systematic thinking required for complex troubleshooting. Her background in general aviation actually provided advantages in understanding fundamental aircraft systems, even when those systems were implemented differently in turbine aircraft. "You're picking this up faster than most people," Carlos observed one evening as Maya successfully diagnosed a hydraulic system problem. "Have you thought about pursuing formal certification?" Maya had been thinking about little else. Skyward Express offered tuition assistance for employees seeking additional qualifications, and her performance had apparently impressed management enough to make her eligible for the program. The prospect of finally obtaining the credentials that had been denied to her elsewhere was both exciting and daunting, but she'd also begun to notice things about the operation that concerned her. The night crew was understaffed, with 4 technicians responsible for maintaining 12 aircraft, operating intensive schedules. Corners were occasionally cut to meet dispatch deadlines, though never in ways that compromised safety. The pressure to keep aircraft flying sometimes conflicted with the thorough maintenance practices Maya believed were essential. One particularly busy night illustrated the tension perfectly. 3 aircraft had arrived within an hour, each requiring different levels of maintenance before their next flights. The crew had to prioritize tasks carefully, focusing on safety-critical items while deferring less urgent work. Maya watched Carlos make rapid decisions about what could wait and what demanded immediate attention. "In general aviation, you have time to be thorough," Carlos explained during a brief break. "Here, you have to be thorough and fast. It's a different kind of pressure." Maya understood the reality of commercial operations, but she also recognized that the pace sometimes prevented the kind of careful observation that had allowed her to catch the engine mount problem. The systematic approach that defined good maintenance required time that wasn't always available in commercial aviation's demanding environment. As her probationary period neared its end, Maya found herself conflicted about her future direction. She'd gained the access to turbine aircraft that she'd sought, and the crew had accepted her as a valuable team member. The opportunity for formal certification was within reach, representing validation of her skills and opening doors to advancement within the industry. Yet she'd also observed the compromises and pressures that define commercial aviation maintenance. The work was rewarding but demanding, requiring adherence to procedures that sometimes conflicted with the intuitive approach that had made her successful in general aviation. She was becoming part of a system that valued efficiency and compliance, alongside the craftsmanship and problem-solving skills that had always defined her identity as a mechanic. That the choice ahead would determine not just her career trajectory, but her fundamental relationship with aviation itself. And unbeknownst to Maya, events were already in motion that would make that choice for her in ways she could never have anticipated. The crisis began on a cold December morning when Maya had been working at Skyward Express for 3 months. She was scheduled for her regular night shift, but a call from Michael Foster at 7 a.m. changed everything. His voice carried an urgency she'd never heard before. "Maya, I need you here immediately. We have a situation that's beyond anything we've dealt with before." When Maya arrived at the facility, she found chaos. Emergency vehicles surrounded the main hangar, their red and blue lights reflecting off the morning frost. Airport security had cordoned off the area, and she could see officials from the FAA, TSA, and what appeared to be federal law enforcement agencies conferring in tight groups. Michael met her at the security checkpoint, his face grim. "There's been an incident. Flight 847, our Boeing 737 cargo run from Boston, experienced multiple system failures about an hour ago. The aircraft is currently circling over Long Island Sound with 89 people aboard. Maya felt her stomach drop. 89 people? But that's a cargo aircraft. Emergency medical evacuation, Michael explained as they hurried toward the operations center. The aircraft was returning from Boston after delivering medical supplies when they received an urgent request to transport patients from a hospital. Fire in Providence. Burn victims, mostly children, along with medical staff and critical care equipment. They're flying direct to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia burn unit. The operations center buzzed with activity. Controllers coordinated with multiple agencies while technicians analyzed telemetry data streaming from the troubled aircraft. Maya could see the aircraft's position on radar screens, tracing a slow circle over the Sound while burning precious fuel. Captain Lisa Park, the senior pilot for Skyward Express, stood at the center of the activity, coordinating the response. Maya recognized her as David Park's sister, though she was known throughout the company for her calm professionalism under pressure. Today, that composure was being tested severely. What exactly happened? Maya asked Michael quietly. The aircraft departed Providence normally, but about 30 minutes into the flight, they started experiencing cascading system failures. First the autopilot disengaged, then the primary flight management system failed. Now they're reporting problems with hydraulics, electrical systems, and engine controls. Maya listened to the radio communications between the aircraft and controllers. Captain Jennifer Walsh's voice came through clearly, professional but strained. Bradley Tower, we're showing failures in multiple systems. Hydraulic pressure is fluctuating, engine parameters are unstable, and we've lost most of our automated systems. We're maintaining control manually, but the aircraft is becoming increasingly difficult to fly. The co-pilot, Marcus Thompson, provided additional details. We're experiencing uncommanded engine power changes, intermittent hydraulic pressure loss, and electrical fluctuations affecting multiple systems. The passengers include children on life support equipment that's running on battery power. Maya felt the weight of the situation settling over everyone in the room. This wasn't just an aircraft emergency. It was a race against time to save critically injured patients whose lives depended on reaching specialized medical care. What are the options? Captain Park asked the assembled group. FAA Inspector Charles Bennett, a gray-haired man with decades of experience, reviewed the aircraft's maintenance records on his tablet. The aircraft passed all recent inspections. There's no obvious cause for these cascading failures. We're looking at either an extremely rare coincidence of multiple system breakdowns or some kind of systematic problem we haven't identified. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the medical coordinator accompanying the patients, provided updates on their condition via radio. Several patients are critical. We have limited battery power for life support equipment. We need to land as soon as possible. Boeing technical representative Kevin Anderson participate via conference call from Seattle. Based on the described symptoms, this doesn't match any known failure mode. The combination of hydraulic, electrical, and engine control problems suggests either sabotage or an unprecedented systematic failure. Maya listened to the technical discussion with growing frustration. The experts were focused on identifying the cause of the failures, but the immediate need was finding a way to land the aircraft safely. Time was running out, and 89 lives hung in the balance. What about emergency landing procedures? Captain Park asked. That's the problem, Inspector Bennett replied. The failures are affecting the systems required for emergency landings. They can't extend the landing gear reliably, the flaps are intermittent, and without hydraulic pressure, the flight controls are extremely difficult to manage, Maya studied. The telemetry data displayed on the screens around her. The aircraft's flight path showed increasing instability as the pilot struggled to maintain control. Engine parameters fluctuated wildly. Hydraulic pressure cycled between normal and dangerously low levels, and electrical systems came online and offline unpredictably. Something about the pattern bothered her. The failures weren't random. They followed a sequence that suggested a common cause. Maya had seen similar patterns in smaller aircraft when electromagnetic interference affected multiple systems simultaneously. "Has anyone checked for electromagnetic interference?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent. Inspector Bennett looked at her with surprise. "EMI? From what source?" Maya pointed to the data displays. "Look at the pattern of failures. They're not random. They're cascading through interconnected systems. The timing suggests something is disrupting the electronic interfaces between systems." Boeing Representative Anderson spoke from the phone. "That's actually possible. If there's electromagnetic interference affecting the aircraft's data buses, it could cause exactly this type of systematic failure. But what would cause EMI strong enough to affect a commercial aircraft?" Captain Park asked. Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. Medical equipment. The emergency medical evacuation. They loaded specialized equipment for the burn. Patients. Some medical devices generate strong electromagnetic fields. Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. "We have multiple life support machines, patient monitors, and a portable MRI unit for diagnostic imaging." "A portable MRI?" Kevin Anderson's voice carried a sudden alarm. "Those generate extremely powerful magnetic fields. If it's not properly shielded... Inspector Bennett was already coordinating with the aircraft. "Flight 847, we need you to power down all non-essential medical equipment immediately. We suspect electromagnetic interference from medical devices may be causing your system failures." The next several minutes stretched endlessly as the crew worked to identify and isolate the interfering equipment. Maya watched the telemetry displays, hoping to see improvement in system performance. But the failures continued, and the aircraft's condition continued to deteriorate. "It's not helping," Captain Walsh reported. "We've shut down everything we can, but the problems persist. Whatever's causing this, it's not the active medical equipment." Maya stared at the data patterns, her frustration growing. The EMI theory had made sense, but shutting down the suspected sources hadn't resolved the problem. Something else was causing the systematic failures. "Wait," she said suddenly. "What if it's not interference from the medical equipment itself, but interaction between the aircraft's electrical systems and the medical equipment's power requirements?" She turned to Dr. Martinez on the radio. "Doctor, how much power are your life support systems drawing from the aircraft's electrical system?" "We're running at maximum capacity," Dr. Martinez replied. "Multiple ventilators, cardiac monitors, dialysis equipment, probably close to the aircraft's auxiliary power limits." Maya felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. The electrical load is destabilizing the aircraft's power system. When voltage fluctuates, it affects the digital systems that control everything else. It's not EMI, it's power system instability, cascading through interconnected systems. Kevin Anderson's voice carried excitement. That could be it. The 737 cargo configuration wasn't designed for such high auxiliary power loads. The electrical system is struggling to maintain stable voltage under the demand. So how do we fix it? Captain Park demanded. Maya's mind raced through the technical possibilities. Reducing power load would mean shutting down life support equipment, which could kill the patients. But leaving the systems running was causing failures that could crash the aircraft, killing everyone aboard. "There might be a way," Maya said slowly. "If we can isolate the essential life support systems on battery power and reduce the load on the aircraft's electrical system, we might stabilize the other systems long enough to land." "But the batteries won't last long enough," Dr. Martinez protested. "They don't have to last long," Maya replied. "Just long enough to land. We isolate the most critical patients on battery power, shut down everything else, and give the aircraft's electrical system a chance to stabilize. Inspector Bennett looked skeptical. That's an enormous risk. If the batteries fail during approach, if we don't try it, the aircraft may not be able to approach at all, Maya countered. The system failures are getting worse. Soon they won't be able to control the aircraft at all. Captain Park made the decision. Do it. Dr. Martinez, identify the patients who absolutely must have powered life support during landing. Everything else goes to battery backup or gets shut down. The next 20 minutes were the longest in Maya's life. She listened to radio communications as the medical team worked frantically to reorganize their life support systems, prioritizing patients and equipment. Several patients had to be manually ventilated as their automated systems were shut down to reduce electrical load. Gradually, the aircraft systems began to stabilize. Hydraulic pressure readings steadied, engine parameters smoothed out, and electrical fluctuations decreased. The pilots reported improved control authority as automated systems came back online. Bradley Tower, this is Flight 847, Captain Walsh reported. We're showing system improvements. Hydraulics are stable, engines are responding normally, and we have positive control of the aircraft. But Maya knew the crisis wasn't over. The aircraft still faced the challenge of landing with reduced system redundancy, and the medical team was manually sustaining several patients whose lives depended on reaching the hospital quickly. Flight 847, Bradley Tower clears you for immediate approach to runway 24, the controller announced. Emergency equipment is standing by. Maya watched the radar screen as the aircraft turned toward Bradley International, beginning its descent from holding altitude. The approach would test whether the temporary solution would hold long enough to get everyone safely on the ground. As the aircraft descended through 5,000 feet, one of the battery systems failed. Dr. Martinez's voice carried new urgency. We're losing power to patient 3's ventilator. Beginning manual ventilation. The medical team was now manually breathing for 2 critically injured children while the aircraft continued its approach. Maya realized that saving the aircraft was only half the battle. Keeping the patients alive during the approach required heroic efforts from the medical staff. At 2,000 feet, Captain Walsh reported new problems. Bradley Tower, we're experiencing control difficulties again. The electrical load from the remaining systems is causing intermittent failures. Maya made a split-second decision. She grabbed the radio microphone from the controller's station. Flight 847, this is Maya Chen in Bradley Operations. I'm an aircraft mechanic who's been analyzing your situation. You need to shed more electrical load immediately. Turn off all non-essential cabin lighting. Reduce avionics to minimum required for landing, and have the medical team prepare for complete battery operation during final approach. Inspector Bennett started to object, but Captain Park silenced him with a gesture. Let her talk. Her diagnosis has been accurate so far. Captain Walsh, Maya continued, the electrical system instability will get worse as you descend and increase power for approach. You need to minimize electrical load now before you lose control authority completely. Roger, reducing electrical load, Captain Walsh replied. The aircraft continued its approach in semi-darkness, with only essential navigation lights and minimum cockpit lighting. In the passenger cabin, medical staff worked by flashlight to monitor patients and maintain manual life support. At 500 feet, the aircraft appeared stable. At 200 feet, Maya held her breath as she watched the radar return track steadily toward the runway threshold. The landing lights blazed briefly as the aircraft touched down and then erupted in the flashing lights of emergency vehicles racing toward the arrival gate. Flight 847 is down safely, the tower controller announced, but Maya knew the crisis wasn't truly over until the patients reached the hospital. As emergency medical teams rushed aboard the aircraft to transfer the critically injured children to waiting helicopters, she realized that her technical diagnosis had been only the first step in a complex rescue operation that had required heroic efforts from everyone involved. The aftermath would bring investigations, analysis, and probably changes to regulations governing medical evacuation flights. But for now, 89 people were alive because someone had recognized a pattern in the data and found a way to break the deadly cycle of cascading failures. Maya watched the helicopters lift off toward Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, carrying their precious cargo to specialized care. She had solved the technical problem, but whether she had truly saved those lives would depend on what happened in the operating rooms over the next several hours. The immediate crisis of landing Flight 847 had passed, but as Maya watched the emergency vehicles surround the aircraft, she realized the real challenge was just beginning. The Boeing 737 sat on the runway with its engines still running, afraid to shut down completely in case the electrical problems returned. Inside, medical teams worked frantically to stabilize patients before transferring them to waiting helicopters. Inspector Bennett approached Maya in the operations center, his expression mixing gratitude with concern. "Ms. Chun, your diagnosis saved those lives. But we have a new problem. The aircraft can't stay on the runway indefinitely, and we need to understand exactly what went wrong before we can clear it for any further operation." Captain Park nodded. Grimly, "The passengers need to reach Philadelphia as quickly as possible, but we can't risk another emergency. The question is whether this aircraft is safe to fly the remaining distance." Maya studied the telemetry data still streaming from the aircraft. The electrical systems had stabilized after reducing the power load, but she could see intermittent fluctuations that suggested the underlying problem hadn't been fully resolved. "The aircraft is stable right now, but only because we've reduced the electrical demand. If they try to fly to Philadelphia with full medical equipment operating, the same problems will likely return." Dr. Martinez's voice came through the radio from the aircraft. "We've got 3 patients who need immediate transport to the burn center. The helicopter can only take 1 patient at a time, and the weather is deteriorating. We need to get this aircraft airborne again." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everyone was looking to her for answers, but she was acutely aware that she was still just a maintenance trainee, without formal certification on this type of aircraft. Her unofficial status felt more precarious than ever as federal investigators and company officials waited for her recommendations. "There might be a solution," Maya said slowly, "but it would require modifying the aircraft's electrical configuration in a way that's never been attempted before." Kevin Anderson's voice crackled through the conference call from Boeing. "What do you have in mind?" Maya moved to the whiteboard, sketching out the aircraft's electrical system architecture. "The problem is that the medical equipment is drawing power from the same buses that supply critical flight systems. When the demand exceeds the generator's capacity, voltage fluctuations affect everything connected to those buses." She drew additional lines on her diagram. "But if we could isolate the medical equipment on a separate electrical system, using the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and emergency batteries in a modified configuration, we might be able to maintain stable power to both medical equipment and flight systems." Inspector Bennett looked skeptical. "That would require rewiring part of the aircraft's electrical system. We don't have authorization for such modifications, and there's no time for proper engineering analysis." "The alternative is watching those children die," Maya replied firmly. "We have maybe 2 hours before weather conditions make helicopter transport impossible. After that, this aircraft is their only chance." Captain Park studied Maya's diagram. "Could this actually work? And more importantly, could you implement it?" Maya felt her heart racing. She was being asked to take responsibility for modifications that went far beyond her official qualifications. If something went wrong, she would bear the blame for any consequences, but if she didn't act, children would die. I would need access to the aircraft's electrical schematics in about 90 minutes, Maya said. I'd also need 2 other technicians to help with the physical modifications. Michael Foster stepped forward. Carlos and Janet are both here. They know the aircraft systems as well as anyone. This is highly irregular, Inspector Bennett protested. We're talking about field modifications to a commercial aircraft by personnel who aren't even certified on this aircraft type. Captain Park's voice cut through the debate. Inspector, with respect, we're in an emergency situation. Those children don't have time for regular procedures. If Ms. Chun thinks she can solve this problem, I'm willing to authorize the attempt. Maya took a deep breath. I'll need complete access to the aircraft's maintenance documentation and full authority to direct the modification process. And I need everyone to understand that this is experimental. There are no guarantees. Within minutes, Maya found herself walking across the tarmac toward Flight 847, carrying a toolkit and a tablet loaded with the aircraft's electrical schematics. Carlos and Janet flanked her, their expressions mixing confidence in her abilities with concern about the unprecedented nature of what they were attempting. Inside the aircraft, the scene was controlled chaos. Medical personnel maintained life support for critical patients while preparing others for helicopter transport. Dr. Martinez briefed Maya on the power requirements for each piece of equipment, helping her prioritize which systems were absolutely essential for the flight to Philadelphia. The portable dialysis unit draws the most power, Dr. Martinez explained. But without it, patient 7 won't survive the flight. The ventilators for patients 3 and 5 are also critical. They can't be manually ventilated for 2 hours. Maya assessed the aircraft's electrical panel, mentally calculating load requirements and available power sources. The modification would require connecting medical equipment to the auxiliary power unit through a bypass circuit that isolated it from the main electrical buses. It was theoretically possible, but would require precise work in cramped conditions. Carlos, I need you to access the auxiliary power compartment and prepare to install these bypass connections, Maya directed, handing him a hand-drawn schematic. Janet, we need to isolate circuits 14 through 18 from the main bus and route them through the emergency battery system. As they began work, Maya felt the familiar satisfaction of solving complex technical problems. But this time, the stakes were unlike anything she'd ever faced. Every connection had to be perfect, every calculation precise. There was no margin for error. The modification required rewiring power connections in 3 different parts of the aircraft. Maya crawled through maintenance access panels, tracing circuits and installing temporary connections. Her hands worked automatically while her mind calculated voltage drops, current loads, and fault conditions. How's it looking? Dr. Martinez asked during a brief break. We're making progress, Maya replied, though privately she was concerned about the complexity of what they were attempting. The temporary modifications were holding, but she was pushing the aircraft's electrical system into an unprecedented configuration. As the 90-minute deadline approached, Maya made the final connections and powered up the modified system. The aircraft's electrical parameters stabilized immediately, with medical equipment operating on isolated power circuits, while flight systems maintained clean, stable power. It's working, Carlos announced, monitoring the system displays. Medical equipment is drawing power from the auxiliary system, and the main flight systems are showing stable voltage. Maya allowed herself a moment of relief, but she knew the real test would come when the aircraft attempted to fly. The modifications had solved the ground-based problems, but flight conditions would stress the electrical system in ways that were impossible to predict. Dr. Martinez, we need to test every piece of medical equipment to ensure it's operating properly on the modified power system, Maya directed. Captain Walsh, we should run engine tests to verify that the flight systems remain stable under all power configurations. The next 30 minutes involved comprehensive testing of every system aboard the aircraft. Maya monitored electrical parameters while medical staff verified that life support equipment was functioning normally. The modifications were holding, but she remained acutely aware that she was asking the aircraft to operate outside its designed parameters. "Everything checks out," Captain Walsh reported from the cockpit. "Flight systems are stable, and we have positive control authority. Medical team reports all equipment is functioning normally." Maya felt a mixture of pride and terror. Her modifications had apparently solved the immediate problem, but she would bear responsibility for the outcome of the flight to Philadelphia. If something went wrong during the flight, 89 lives would be on her conscience. "Flight 847 is cleared for departure," the tower controller announced. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Maya stood in the operations center watching radar displays that would track the flight's progress. She had done everything she could to ensure a safe flight, but now the outcome was beyond her control. The Boeing lifted off from Bradley International and turned south toward Philadelphia, carrying its precious cargo of injured children and the experimental electrical modifications that Maya had designed in 90 minutes under conditions no engineering textbook had ever contemplated. For the next hour and 40 minutes, Maya would wait and watch, knowing that her reputation, her career, and her sense of self-worth hung in the balance with every mile. The aircraft flew toward its destination. The immediate crisis of landing, Flight 847, had passed. But as Maya watched the emergency vehicle surround the aircraft, she realized the real challenge was just beginning. The Boeing 737 sat on the runway with its engines still running, afraid to shut down completely in case the electrical problems returned. Inside, medical teams worked frantically to stabilize patients before transferring them to waiting helicopters. Inspector Bennett approached Maya in the operations center, his expression mixing gratitude with concern. "Miss Chun, your diagnosis saved those lives. But we have a new problem. The aircraft can't stay on the runway indefinitely, and we need to understand exactly what went wrong before we can clear it for any further operation." Captain Park nodded. Grimly, "The passengers need to reach Philadelphia as quickly as possible, but we can't risk another emergency. The question is whether this aircraft is safe to fly the remaining distance." Maya studied the telemetry data still streaming from the aircraft. The electrical systems had stabilized after reducing the power load, but she could see intermittent fluctuations that suggested the underlying problem hadn't been fully resolved. "The aircraft is stable right now, but only because we've reduced the electrical demand. If they try to fly to Philadelphia with full medical equipment operating, the same problems will likely return." Dr. Martinez's voice came through the radio from the aircraft. "We've got 3 patients who need immediate transport to the burn center. The helicopter can only take 1 patient at a time, and the weather is deteriorating. We need to get this aircraft airborne again." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everyone was looking to her for answers, but she was acutely aware that she was still just a maintenance trainee without formal certification on this type of aircraft. Her unofficial status felt more precarious than ever as federal investigators and company officials waited for her recommendations. "There might be a solution," Maya said slowly, "but it would require modifying the aircraft's electrical configuration in a way that's never been attempted before." Kevin Anderson's voice crackled through the conference call from Boeing. "What do you have in mind?" Maya moved to the whiteboard, sketching out the aircraft's electrical system architecture. "The problem is that the medical equipment is drawing power from the same buses that supply critical flight systems. When the demand exceeds the generator's capacity, voltage fluctuations affect everything connected to those buses." She drew additional lines on her diagram. "But if we could isolate the medical equipment on a separate electrical system, Using the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and emergency batteries in a modified configuration, we might be able to maintain stable power to both medical equipment and flight systems. Inspector Bennett looked skeptical. That would require rewiring part of the aircraft's electrical system. We don't have authorization for such modifications, and there's no time for proper engineering analysis. The alternative is watching those children die, Maya replied firmly. We have maybe 2 hours before weather conditions make helicopter transport impossible. After that, this aircraft is their only chance. Captain Park studied Maya's diagram. Could this actually work? And more importantly, could you implement it? Maya felt her heart racing. She was being asked to take responsibility for modifications that went far beyond her official qualifications. If something went wrong, she would bear the blame for any consequences. But if she didn't act, children would die. I would need access to the aircraft's electrical schematics in about 90 minutes, Maya said. I'd also need 2 other technicians to help with the physical modifications. Michael Foster stepped forward. Carlos and Janet are both here. They know the aircraft systems as well as anyone. This is highly irregular, Inspector Bennett protested. We're talking about field modifications to a commercial aircraft by personnel who aren't even certified on this aircraft type. Captain Park's voice cut through the debate. Inspector, with respect, we're in an emergency situation. Those children don't have time for regular procedures. If Ms. Chun thinks she can solve this problem, I'm willing to authorize the attempt. Maya took a deep breath. I'll need complete access to the aircraft's maintenance documentation and full authority to direct the modification process. And I need everyone to understand that this is experimental. There are no guarantees. Within minutes, Maya found herself walking across the tarmac toward Flight 847, carrying a toolkit and a tablet loaded with the aircraft's electrical schematics. Carlos and Janet flanked her, their expressions mixing confidence in her abilities with concern about the unprecedented nature of what they were attempting. Inside the aircraft, the scene was controlled chaos. Medical personnel maintained life support for critical patients while preparing others for helicopter transport. Dr. Martinez briefed Maya on the power requirements for each piece of equipment, helping her prioritize which systems were absolutely essential for the flight to Philadelphia. The portable dialysis unit draws the most power, Dr. Martinez explained. But without it, patient 7 won't survive the flight. The ventilators for patients 3 and 5 are also critical. They can't be manually ventilated for 2 hours. Maya assessed the aircraft's electrical panel, mentally calculating load requirements and available power sources. The modification would require connecting medical equipment to the auxiliary power unit through a bypass circuit that isolated it from the main electrical buses. It was theoretically possible, but would require precise work in cramped conditions. Carlos, I need you to access the auxiliary power compartment and prepare to install these bypass connections, Maya directed, handing him a hand-drawn schematic. Janet, we need to isolate circuits 14 through 18 from the main bus and route them through the emergency battery system. As they began work, Maya felt the familiar satisfaction of solving complex technical problems. But this time, the stakes were unlike anything she'd ever faced. Every connection had to be perfect, every calculation precise. There was no margin for error. The modification required rewiring power connections in 3 different parts of the aircraft. Maya crawled through maintenance access panels, tracing circuits and installing temporary connections. Her hands worked automatically while her mind calculated voltage drops, current loads, and fault conditions. How's it looking? Dr. Martinez asked during a brief break. We're making progress, Maya replied, though privately she was concerned about the complexity of what they were attempting. The temporary modifications were holding, but she was pushing the aircraft's electrical system into an unprecedented configuration as the 90-minute deadline approached. Maya made the final connections and powered up the modified system. The aircraft's electrical parameters stabilized immediately, with medical equipment operating on isolated power circuits, while flight systems maintained clean, stable power. "It's working," Carlos announced, monitoring the system displays. Medical equipment is drawing power from the auxiliary system, and the main flight systems are showing stable voltage. Maya allowed herself a moment of relief, but she knew the real test would come when the aircraft attempted to fly. The modifications had solved the ground-based problems, but flight conditions would stress the electrical system in ways that were impossible to predict. "Dr. Martinez, we need to test every piece of medical equipment to ensure it's operating properly on the modified power system," Maya directed. "Captain Walsh, we should run engine tests to verify that the flight systems remain stable under all power configurations." The next 30 minutes involved comprehensive testing of every system aboard the aircraft. Maya monitored electrical parameters while medical staff verified that life support equipment was functioning normally. The modifications were holding, but she remained acutely aware that she was asking the aircraft to operate outside its designed parameters. "Everything checks out," Captain Walsh reported from the cockpit. "Flight systems are stable, and we have positive control authority. Medical team reports all equipment is functioning normally." Maya felt a mixture of pride and terror. Her modifications had apparently solved the immediate problem, but she would bear responsibility for the outcome of the flight to Philadelphia. If something went wrong during the flight, 89 lives would be on her conscience. "Flight 847 is cleared for departure," the tower controller announced as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Maya stood in the operations center watching radar displays that would track the flight's progress. She had done everything she could to ensure a safe flight, but now the outcome was beyond her control. The Boeing lifted off from Bradley International and turned south toward Philadelphia, carrying its precious cargo of injured children and the experimental electrical modifications that Maya had designed in 90 minutes under conditions no engineering textbook had ever contemplated. For the next hour and 40 minutes, Maya would wait and watch, knowing that her reputation, her career, and her sense of self-worth hung in the balance with every mile the aircraft flew toward its destination. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.